Good evening from Raleigh, North Carolina on Saturday, September the 23rd at approximately 9:25 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Remember to make all decisions based on official National Hurricane Center forecast and National Weather Service forecast products. So I wanted to give a quick update on Hurricane Maria as it continues to spin east-northeast of the Bahamas, and as it continues its approach northward, and to talk about possible impacts it could have on the coast of North Carolina, maybe even some impacts inland in terms of wind, some gusty winds. We'll review that in a couple of minutes, but just to kind of give a current update on the storm and just provide a daily update, daily evening update to tell you what is going on with our still major Hurricane Maria. Still a Category 3 storm with winds of 115 miles per hour, minimum central pressure of 950 millibars, and I believe it's moving north at 9 miles per hour. We'll check the forecast advisory in a minute to verify that, but not in a huge hurry. Last night we talked about shear and how the storm was looking a little disheveled and looking a little disorganized, which was good in terms of intensity. And the winds have come down to 115 miles per hour slightly, so there has been some weakening. But overall, the system is still maintaining its major hurricane status because it's kind of the shear has backed off a little bit. You can see more of the development of an eye. We just got a new frame here as it readjusts here. If we speed this up to the speed it was, so you can see the eye here. This is infrared satellite imagery from the satellite we put up, GO 16 last fall. And what you're seeing here is, an intense, last night we did not even have this intense ring of convection around the center of the storm, the eye. It was just very disheveled. It was kind of unorganized, but tonight it looks a little more impressive on satellite. Still not exactly a symmetrical storm. On Visibus satellite today, it looked a little more impressive too. So it's kind of, it'll probably fluctuate gradually with in intensity over the next few days. But as it continues to work northward, it'll eventually hit some cooler waters and eventually kind of hit another area of wind shear, which will continue to weaken the storm. So it may fluctuate a little bit over the next few days in intensity, but by the time it does reach the equivalent, line of latitude as North Carolina, off of the North Carolina coast, I think it's going to be weak enough to where it shouldn't be a huge deal, but we'll talk a minute about some of the impacts it could have and why it could still be a big deal for people in the coastal plain of North Carolina and on the coast. So let's look at the infrared satellite imagery. So if we take a look at some of the latest spaghetti plots, you may have heard them called. These are ensemble plots, so you're seeing several members of a model run, and confidence remains high that at least over the next, these numbers you may see embedded in here, if you can make them out, those are timestamps. So if you see 24, that represents 24 hours, that's a day ahead, 48, 2 days, and so on. So you can see that through at least 48 hours, there's pretty good confidence that it's going to continue on this northwest track and kind of keep going up here at a relatively slow rate. And here is coastal North Carolina. For some reason, the southern part of the Outer Banks are not plotted on this chart, but there are some barrier islands out here in the Outer Banks. Hatteras is right down here, and then down here we have Topsail Island and areas over here. Not sure why that didn't plot, but there is some land here that is not being shown. But the bottom line is that it's showing it approaching and then making this curve. You may not be able to make it out too well here, but it kind of has, if I get my marker out here, it has it following this northward trend and then making, it kind of hovers around and loops, and then a trough comes and carries it back out to sea. So that's kind of the general, pattern of the plots here. It may be hard to make out, but it makes this forward motion and then makes a loop and then shoots back out to sea when it's carried away by a trough. That will bring us some relief too as well in terms of some of the relentless heat we've had here over the past few days, feeling very unseasonable. So this is these are initialized earlier today, or excuse me, this is the 0Z run and this is a global model. So this is some of the latest guidance that we're seeing. Not really too much in the way of trends either way. It's kind of remained in this area for the past couple of runs, about the past 24 to 48 hours of model guidance. So confidence is increasing that it's going to kind of shoot northward and then just kind of stall almost off the coast, kind of like Jose did. It just kind of hangs out for a long time, makes a little loop, and then gets carried out to sea. So let's talk about well, I'll first visit the National Hurricane Center official track, and then we'll talk about what kind of impacts that little stalled account could have. So if we convert this into the National Hurricane Center track, this track is based off of a lot more model guidance. I just showed you one example, but this is the cone of uncertainty, and this cone represents where the center of the storm could be in the next few days. The solid color represents within 3 days, and this dotted shade in here represents within 5 days. As you can see, confidence is high that it continues northward, but then there's this large area where the center of the storm could be. And remember, I reiterate, that's where the center of the storm could be. Currently, the wind field, is in excess. Tropical storm force sustained winds extend hundreds of miles outward from the center of Maria. So that is certainly something to keep in mind. If the center of the storm tracks this way and ends up over here, the tropical storm force wind field could, reach inland of North Carolina over the Hampton Roads, maybe even the southern part of the Delmarva Peninsula out into the ocean. If it comes over here, we may see nothing. Bermuda may even get some tropical storm force wind. So the position is critical in terms of the wind. What's more certain is the wave action, and we're already experiencing some choppy seas and some very dangerous rip currents and very rough seas due to Jose, and kind of Jose passed the baton to Maria. So there's been this constant rough sea over the past few days. Rip currents, not a very good time to be at the beach. So if we kind of expand more on that wave action, this is a wave model showing wave heights, and I can't locate a scale on this site, but you can kind of figure out from the color scheme here, the more intense, bright, warm colors are higher wave heights. So up here is the coast of North Carolina. Here is the Pamlico Sound. Here's Albemarle Sound, if you're familiar with those. Here are some of the Outer Banks Islands. Here's coastal South Carolina, and this is Florida, obviously, so it kind of gives you position. The state borders are not drawn here, but you can get the idea. And if I go forward in time here, as I hover with my mouse, you can see these big wave heights associated with Hurricane Maria. It goes forward and then it kind of stalls. Each of these steps are 3 hours at a time. And here, if I kind of toggle back and forth, Maria doesn't move very much, or whatever's left of Maria, which will probably be a Category 1 hurricane at this point, just kind of stalls there. And, these colors may not be right on land here, but what this means is that seas will be even more rough. There will be even more overwash on Highway 12 or along the coast, just because wave heights are expected to increase when this wall of water is pushed up by Maria, also known as storm surge in some cases. I'll touch on that in just a minute with another map I'll show you, but storm surge is looking like the biggest issue at this point, just because as Maria is going to be in such a big system as it pushes this wall of water up, the Outer Banks are obviously very susceptible to that because there are water on both sides, and with shifting winds, that could pose a pretty serious issue out there. As far as winds, I can actually toggle wind on here on the same site, and of course we don't have a scale here, but the more intense colors would represent wind, and this would have winds shifting, coming in from the north here, which would blow water. It would actually push the water, from the Pamlico Sound here down to some of the lower islands. I'll elaborate on that in a second with another map I'll show you, but if we can even look at pressure here and kind of just see the general motion of the storm. So I'm not going to show you any deterministic model guidance, which is when you see me step forward in time and it's one model solution. I'm not going to show that tonight. I'm kind of sticking with more of an ensemble feel and just kind of a general impact summary tonight. But you can see the path here, and as it comes out, Maria just kind of stalls and then it weakens. Those isobars expand. It's not as tightly wound up. It's a weaker system as it goes carried out to sea. So that's certainly something to watch. That's certainly what appears to be the biggest risk right now. If we say what's the biggest impact from Maria for North Carolina in the next few days, I would say high surf, deadly rip currents, overwash in the Outer Banks, and storm surge. From that, winds inland could cause some power outages along the coast. But I'm not sure. Models they do a pretty poor job of predicting the intensity of hurricanes because they're very complex systems within the system of the atmosphere. So there's a lot of work to be done in improving hurricane forecasts, but intensity forecasts are some of the hardest things to predict in hurricanes. So currently it's modeled to be a Category 1, maybe a weekend or a low in Category 2, high in Category 1, could be a little bit weaker. But the problem is as storms go northward here, they expand, they swell. So no matter what, a large area will feel the impacts no matter where that center goes in that forecast cone that I showed you. So this is a satellite image showing coastal North Carolina. Here's Virginia, here's North Carolina, and the South Carolina right down here, borders somewhere in here. I can't quite make it out. But the main point I want to show you here is that, here are all of our coastal communities. Here's the Outer Banks. Anything to the northwest of this is the Pamlico Sound. Albemarle Sound is up here. The Atlantic Ocean is on the other side of the barrier islands here. So the problem is if we have Maria come up here and kind of park it up here, it'll be, the rotation around the hurricane is going to go counterclockwise. So it's going to be pushing in water that way. So if Maria is coming up here, we'll first have to deal with it pushing water this way onto the Outer Banks, because the circulation, if you kind of imagine, it's going to be pushing like that almost. If you can follow my spiral here, it's going to be spinning as it's coming north. So it's pushing this wall of water here. If I can get my marker back, it's pushing this wall of water up into here. And that's a problem because even with Jose, we had an overwash problem. Water was, splashing over some of the sand dunes, some of like the ocean barriers, splashing onto Highway 12, causing some minor flooding. So even with a weaker storm like Jose, that was a problem. But then if Maria continues to sit up here, you have winds coming in from the east now too, because if the center of circulation is right here and this circling around it this way, counterclockwise, you have winds being pushing ocean onto the barrier islands this way. And this is a very narrow strip of land all through here, the Outer Banks. You may be familiar with, you may have heard of the Bonner Bridge or Highway 12. It's a very narrow strip of land that's very susceptible to flooding and being submerged because you have this. And then if Maria continues to kind of hang out here and even gets a little closer, you can even have winds in this area here of the circulation. You could have winds actually pushing in the Pamlico Sound, pushing water on the other side down here in Buxton and Cape Hatteras, areas like that. So it's very dependent on where the center of the storm ends up and where it kind of parks into the direction of the wind, because initially you'll have this push of the Atlantic Ocean literally onto the Outer Banks, but then if Maria comes up here before it gets taken out to sea, it could actually be pushing water onto here and could be pushing water from the Pamlico Sound southward onto the island. So you could be getting storms. This is a very unique problem with the Outer Banks because a lot of times, hurricanes may make landfall down here, but if we ever get a storm that kind of hangs out up here, and say the center of circulation here is here, it's actually pushing water from the Atlantic here, and it's also pushing water down this way. So there's a lot of arrows on here, but you get the idea of what I'm saying, how you can have water coming in from this side and also being pushed on the inland, the land side of the water. So that's certainly an issue to look out for. That could probably be the most impactful kind of effects we feel from Hurricane Maria if this forecast verifies. As far as inland, the main concern is wind. I don't really think much rain will come from this inland. Speaking of wind, I actually have this great graphic that is relatively new from the Hurricane Center this season. I think they used it a little bit last season, but what we're seeing here is probability of the earliest reasonable arrival of tropical storm force winds. That means sustained, so that means the outside wind would be blowing 39 miles per hour or greater. So you can see parts of inland North Carolina and the lower probabilities, but on the Outer Banks here, they're now entering this greater than 50% threshold of having sustained tropical force winds. So you're talking more power outages, and now you're talking, a stronger overall impact from the storm, just because it's going to be having the storm surge being pushed, but also you're going to be having tropical storm force winds that could cause some minor flooding along the Outer Banks. And to kind of touch back on some of the coastal flooding I was talking about earlier, the degree of the flooding is really dependent on where the storm exactly goes. If the storm maintains a track further out to sea, maybe the flooding won't be as bad. There'll just be some overwash. There will be some, water pushed onto Highway 12 or roads in that area. But if the storm comes a little closer and it still maintains its intensity, that could be a little more problematic. That's something to keep an eye on. So you just need to be aware that if you live in any of those areas, Ocracoke Island comes to mind, Cape Hatteras, Rodanthe, Waves is a community out there. So just to kind of touch on a few places that may have this maximum kind of impact from Hurricane Maria. It's kind of died down in the news because Maria was expected to go out to sea, and it's kind of fluctuating. It's kind of frustrating to not know exactly where the storm's going to go, but that's what we're dealing with. And if I skip here forward, just a reminder, we still are in the peak of hurricane season, and we will be in the peak of hurricane season through the remainder of the season. Officially ends on November 30th. So this is the September 10th is the historical climax of hurricane season, and then sometimes we have a little surge in the end of October. So Hurricane Matthew came through on October 8th last year. We're still 2 weeks out from that, so we're still in the midst of hurricane season. Still a lot to go through. Maria is expected to bring some flooding impacts, like I said. I'll have another update tomorrow highlighting some more of those impacts, but we're still in the season. It's a very active pattern. There could be some impacts felt in the western Gulf of Mexico, but I'll touch on another video on that tomorrow, and my recorder's running out of time here, so I will see you on another video tomorrow, and stay safe, and thanks for watching.